Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. So you're about to sit down and watch this video and suddenly somebody knocks on the door. Would it be rational to say that there is somebody behind the door? Or rational to say that somebody or something has caused that knocking? Obviously yes, it's a rational concept or rational idea that the door doesn't cause its own knocking, and therefore there must be something that has caused the knocking from a state of non-knocking. So we naturally ask that, and we naturally come to that conclusion. Now imagine if somebody turned around and said, well, the guy behind the door has green eyes. And I ask, how do you know he has green eyes? And he says, well, I can tell from the knocking. Now does that make a rational sense? Would that be rationally justifiable? Obviously it's not rationally justifiable. So intuitively, the reason why I give this example, because intuitively we can understand that, we can identify what is rational and what is irrational. We have that sort of intuitive knowledge with regards to that. But what we want to try and do today in this session is to precisely lay out the meaning of thought and how thought is generated, and therefore look at some of the key components that we will utilize in order to look at the question of whether the creator exists or not. And this aspect is a little bit more trickier when you're trying to make it more explicit. So the first question that will help us elucidate what rational thinking is to understand how do we generate thoughts in the first place. I'll give some basic examples to inshallah explain this point. So imagine you had a person who's blind and he's been blind from birth, and you say to him the chair is red. He's been blind from birth and you told him the chair is red. He might understand what a chair is, but would he understand what red is? Well, obviously not, because he has no conception of colour. He's never seen colour in his life, let alone the red colour. Similarly, if I was to ask you the question, what does Coke taste like? And here obviously I'm talking about cola Coke, not the other type, the haram type. And you'd probably say, well, Coke, it tastes like Coke. Yeah. You explain it by what you've sensed. But if you maybe try a little harder in terms of explaining it, you might turn around and say, well, it tastes fizzy, it tastes sweet, it has a caramel type of taste. And what we're now doing is, when we're talking about what does, how to generate thinking within a blind man, or how to explain what Coke tastes like, then what we're doing is we're describing things through previously sensed reality. With the blind person, he hasn't got the ability to comprehend because he's not previously sensed it. With the person who's drank Coke, or if he's never drank that, if he's drank fizzy drinks and he's drank sweet drinks, then he can understand, he can correlate with what you're saying. He can generate a thought, okay, I understand what fizzy is, I understand what sweet is, and therefore when you're saying that Coke tastes fizzy and sweet, then I can sort of understand that, I can appreciate that. So you're describing things based upon previously sensed reality, and these things are stored in our heads. So I can interpret and understand what someone else is saying, and when they describe something through this reference point of my previously stored idea. Let me give you another example. Let's say I found a stone tablet and found written on it is some ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. Could I understand the language just by sensing the stone tablet, by looking at the language, the hieroglyphic language? If you had no knowledge of the hieroglyphics, would it be possible? No, it wouldn't. It would be impossible. And in fact, it was impossible to understand the ancient Egyptian language, the hieroglyphic language, because it became a lost language. It was only when they discovered the Rosetta Stone, and here what they had was Egyptian hieroglyphs at the top, and below it was ancient Greek. And because they had knowledge of the ancient Greek, they were able to correspond the words and the meanings and the sentences from the hieroglyphs to the ancient Greek to start to decipher what each word meant, because they already had the previous information of ancient Greek. It already existed. So the reason why I give this example is because when we sense the reality, we don't sense reality without previous information. We still need something else called previous information. Another example of this is language, and I think this is a key example here. language is not something that we simply acquire through experience. So if you put a child in the middle of or baby in the middle of the desert and it grows up, it's not going to acquire language. It's going to have to learn language. So if it's going to English, it's not going to acquire language on its own. It's going to have to be taught English and English words, or Arabic, or whatever other language. In fact, it won't even learn any language. This is a sad reality. There are examples of this where children have been abandoned in the jungles or been neglected in the homes, where they have been isolated and therefore, have not engaged or interacted with other human beings. They've not been spoken to. And so they lost the ability to speak. They didn't speak when they were finally rescued. And this is an example of this was the Russian bird boy, because he was kept in a cage next to birds and he started chirping like the birds. And he was in 2008 and he was found when he was 8 years of age in a Cambodian jungle. There was a girl that was found when she was 27. This is in 2007. And they found that they didn't have language. They didn't have like a basic language. They just didn't have language at all. They just made grunts, no language at all. And also what's also very interesting is that they found that these they termed feral children, these children that did not have any interaction with human language before the age of 7 lost the ability to learn grammar or make grammatically correct speech. So they could, after the age of 7, learn, for example, and identify objects and the names of objects, but they couldn't grammatically construct those vocabularies into a meaningful sentence. So they might turn around and say, food, eat, but they wouldn't be able to say, the food is on the table and I want to eat it. Yeah, but they would just simply use the vocab of that. So this was the case. And what does this indicate? It indicates that actually language that we acquire cannot be something that we acquire ourselves, but rather it has to be taught to us, including grammar. So yes, the brain has to have the capacity to understand and construct language grammatically, but you have to be supplied the input. That input comes from maybe a parent, people around us, or society at large. That's the previous information. And so as a result, we realize that just sensation alone doesn't lead and generate to thinking. This was the point, if you remember, when we talked about the empiricist and the rationalist. We said the empiricist said you're not born with innate ideas, you just need to sense things. Well, actually, we have to be born with certain level of previous information and certain level of innate ideas in order to come up with concepts. Otherwise, just by sensation alone, you wouldn't have that. And this is a profound point, because if it's the case that language itself cannot be acquired by ourselves, it has to be taught to us, then it makes sense when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says in Surah Al-Baqarah verse 31, and he taught Adam all the names of everything. Then he showed them to the angels and said, tell me the names of these if you are truthful. Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning the point that Adam was taught the names of things, i.e. the previous information was first supplied in terms of language and understanding to Adam from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in the Imam at-Tabari's tafsir of this story, he mentions further about how the angels, they came to Adam and they started to test him, his use of language. They found it, novel. And so they asked him, Adam who is the woman who was created to be Adam's wife? And he said, she is Hawa. Yeah. And when the angels asked, why is she named such? And he said, because she was created from something alive. Hay, which means life. So Hawa is a construct of the word hay. And so this allows us, or this also demonstrates to us, an aspect of the thinking process, which is the ability to sense a reality and to link to previous information or innate concepts, and then develop and expand our concepts beyond that. So we can, for example, there's a very brief example. If I've sensed gold and I've sensed a mountain, and in my mind I can imagine a mountain that's purely made out of gold. This is what I can do. I can construct that. Similarly, in language, we can construct based upon the previous information new terms. Like, for example, biology. comes from the word bio and ology. Bio means organic or life, and ology means study. So biology means the study of life. Or terms like globalization, global meaning the world, and ization in this suffix is used to refer to something, to make something like that, or to make it. So globalization means to make global, like nationalization is to make national. So we can construct language in this way, and we can understand whether what we've constructed in this way, is it a rational idea or an irrational idea, because we can make these imaginations like the mountain of gold by understanding whether it has correspondence upon the reality. So let's just really simplify what we've said. Famous scholar Sheikh Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani, and he was a scholar of the 20th century, and he stated what the rational method was and what it was composed of, and he mentioned this in the book Nidam al-Islam, Systems of Islam, and also the book At-Tafkir, The Thinking. And he said rational thinking or rational method is built upon 4 components. First, you need a reality. Second, you need senses to sense the reality. Thirdly, you need the brain, which the reality through the senses is transmitted to the brain, and the brain has stored information or previous information. So you have these things: reality, senses, brain, and previous information in order to generate thought. And if we understand this definition of thought, then we can understand a few things. We can conclude certain things. The first thing that we can conclude is, well, if reality is necessary to think, and I think, therefore reality must exist. So this point about people say, oh, how do we know things around us exist? How do we know reality exists? All these types of speculations. Well, I think, therefore there must be a reality that has allowed me to make this thought in the first place. Secondly, if reality is the cause of thinking, then what we are saying is that causality is a necessary component of rational thinking. So what generated this idea was the reality. So when you've got a person who's blind from birth, he can't sense the colour red. It's not going to generate thinking within him. If he suddenly is able to see and he looks at the colour red, it's going to give him a comprehension of what you mean now by the colour red. He's generated thinking. That generation of thinking, or generating of thinking, was caused by the sensation of reality. So you have to accept this principle of causality as well. Furthermore, causality is even more it can be also shown in another way as well, which is really important and is really very important and connected to the being able to comprehend. Let me give you an example. You've got 2 colorless liquids, and you wanted to know whether these 2 colorless liquids are the same thing, same reality, same liquid, or are they 2 different liquids. How are you going to know? Well, if they react differently at the same cause, you're going to call them 2 different things. For example, if I take one the colorless liquid and I put heat to it and I bring it to the boil and find it boils at 100 degrees Celsius, then I think to myself, hold on, this is distinct and it might be water. And then I take the other liquid and I boil it and I find it boils at about 78 degrees Celsius. I think, hold on, there's 2 different liquids here, because I subject them to the same cause, but they exhibit different effects. And maybe if I drink one liquid, it quenches my thirst, and the other liquid is probably haram, i.e. alcohol, and makes him tipsy. So we distinguish realities based upon the effects differing from each other, even though they inhabit the same causes. So I know a table is different to a camera is different to a light is different to carpet. Just giving you random examples. But the reason why I'm saying this is because we sense the different attributes that exist within these things, and when we're sensing the different attributes, what we're really sensing is the different effects, and the different effects, even though these things exist at the same causality, or the same causes and same conditions. And that's what we store in our mind. That's what we understand. So when we talk about sweet, we're talking about the effect, at the same cause, which is different, or at a particular cause, which is different to maybe something that tastes fizzy. So that's a different effect, even though both are, consumed or tasted. That's how we're sensing them. So therefore we understand and comprehend, and that's how we understand and comprehend the universe around us. So this is what we mean by the rational method. The rational method requires the reality, and it requires previous information, as well as the senses and the brain. That the previous information is something that we have innate concepts like causality, but also it has to be supplied to us through language, has to be taught to us. We've obviously got the Quran as mentioned, but we've also got very strong empirical evidence and also rational evidence on the things like the hieroglyphics, etc. So we've got that. And the other aspect is that causality is a component for rational thinking. So just like I said, if I think there must be a reality that exists, in the same way, if I can think and I need causality to exist in order for me to think, the fact that I think means that therefore causality exists. So causality is not a principle we derive through experience. I see causality, therefore I'll believe in it. Rather, causality is something that's necessary as a component to the thinking process itself. And it's from this basis and understanding that we can start to investigate whether a creator exists or not.